But because it's such a common essential oil, it's the most readily available of essential oils in the market today. You can see by the red pin that I have in the map there, it's grown in Somalia. But it's also, because of its popularity, the most widely researched of all of the frankincense essential oils. So much of the research you see revolves around Boswellia cartieri, and we can take advantage of that by recognizing that many of the compounds we find in one frankincense species are going to be duplicated in the other frankincense species as well, although the variation and the amount of those compounds will vary from species to species. Boswellia neglecta, this is also another very interesting grade of essential oil. It's generally not considered to be a very high grade of frankincense essential oil. It's commonly perceived, really, to be honest with you, just to be a perfume. And so it's used a lot in the perfume industry, which makes it very popular. But we generally don't think of that species of essential oil as having a lot of medicinal benefit. There would be better choices that we could make. Again, it's also grown in the Somalia region. Boswellia Serrata grows actually in Ethiopia. It makes it just a little bit unique. And one of the things that is unique about that essential oil is the type of compounds that it produces. It produces an unusually high amount of alpha-pinene, and that's valuable because when we look at this species, we know that monoterpenes, pinenes, as a monoterpene, we know that they're strongly anti-infectious. And so it's used a lot of times for its antibacterial activity. It's especially good for candida and yeast infections. But one of the things that we want to see with a frankincense oil is we want to see a lot of diversity of the compounds. One of the things to remember about essential oils is one of the reasons why they are so valuable and so beneficial is because we don't have just isolated compounds. We have this balance, something that I commonly refer to as therapeutic balance, where we have multiple compounds working together to create a synergistic effect. So although Boswellia Serrata has a lot of benefits to it, it also has very high amounts of a singular compound. So we would look for an essential oil that has better benefit or a wider range of benefits because of the complexity of the compounds associated with it. I already talked about Boswellia cartieri, but it's interesting because Boswellia cartieri and Boswellia sacra and Boswellia serrata, many people believe that they're all the same identical species, and that's clearly not the case. While Boswellia cartieri is grown in Somalia, Boswellia sacra also comes from Somalia, but also comes from Yemen. It has a little bit of diversity that way. It's a very interesting essential oil. This is a favorite among essential oil producers, and especially in the perfume industry. And the reason why is because this essential oil, this frankincense, has a very deep, woody tone associated with it. It's often associated, because of its popularity, it's one of the least expensive essential oils in the frankincense family. And so a lot of people like to source that because of its low expense. But also that means that you get a lot of variation in terms of the quality associated with it. So while it's very popular among essential oil producers, it's really probably not the essential oil that we'd want to use in a medicinal sense. It would not be our first choice. Boswellia serrata is actually unique because I've got a pin stuck out here in the middle of the ocean, but only because I couldn't make my map big enough to do what I wanted to do. This is oftentimes referred to as Indian Olio Gum, and the reason why is it comes from India, and that again makes it very unique in an environmental sense. It has some very unique qualities associated with it. It has a lot of alpha-pinenes, but generally this oil is only used aromatically as well. It has some topical applications, but by far the greatest value associated with frankincense dates all the way back to its origination, even back to the frankincense trail. I talked about the far region of Oman. One of the reasons why this is superior for its production of essential oils from the Boswellia Serrata tree, that particular species, is because of the environment that that tree dwells within. Remember we talked about chemical polymorphism, and I said that chemical polymorphism is the process by which the environment creates stressors within the plant material itself to produce the most potent and effective essential oil, knowing that the essential oil is the protection system for the plant, as well as the communication of the plant, the identification of the plant, all of those different factors. So it's important that we have the highest potency that we can achieve, and we can do that by sourcing frankincense trees, the resin that comes from the trees in the Dhofar region of Oman. Now, a lot of individuals mistakenly believe that there's not a lot of frankincense in Oman. It is difficult to source, generally because frankincense from Oman is produced by families, and families have housed and taken care of those trees for generations. You're looking at frankincense trees in the Dhofar region of Oman, and you can see it's not a very beautiful environment, and you're probably looking at that frankincense tree and saying, that's not really what I expected to see. We have such an amazing essential oil that comes from a tree that, to be honest with you, isn't really a whole lot to look at. But that environment itself is perfect for producing this most potent form of frankincense. Very rich in limestone. In fact, the soil is mostly limestone, which acts as a terrific biological stressor for this species of frankincense. The climate itself is very arid and very dry, and in fact, when you harvest frankincense from this region of the world, you have to be careful because the climate is so dry that if you do that incorrectly, you'll kill the tree because it will lose all of its moisture because the climate is so harsh. So a little more unforgiving than some of the other climates associated with it. Another thing associated with this region of the world is you have the viper. This snake generally lives in the frankincense trees, and so great care, of course, has to be taken to ensure that there's no carpet vipers in the tree when they go to score the tree. A frankincense tree will generally live for about 100 years if it's taken care of, if it's harvested correctly and properly. And so families through the Dhofar region of Oman spend great time passing from generation to generation the skill necessary to score the trees appropriately so that they have a full lifespan, and also so that you can have as much harvest as you possibly can from the tree. Generally, trees in this region of the world are only harvested 2 or 3 times a year, depending on the tree itself and the conditions at the time of harvest. You've oftentimes heard the term frankincense tears, and you can see here where this frankincense tree has been scored, and you see this white milky resin that now is beginning to ooze from where the tree was scored. That's called the Olio Gum Resin. Now, the Olio Gum Resin is interesting because when we look at the resin itself, the actual content or the amount of essential oil that's found within that resin is relatively small by percentage value. Maybe as little as 6 or 7% of that resin is going to be in the form of an essential oil. That means there's a lot of other constituents in there that carry their own health benefits. This is the reason why anciently they would take the resin itself and they would like to utilize it as incense, or they would chew on it, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. When we liberate the essential oil, it carries with it, and we liberate the essential oil from the Olio Gum Resin here for the same reason that we do from all aromatic plants that we're able to, and that is that the essential oil carries with it some very specific health benefits that are in a concentrated form, and that's why we like to take advantage and utilize the essential oils, because we have vast compounds with this particular frankincense species in the right formation. We call that therapeutic balance. Let me give you a little bit more information about when the tree is scored. Over a period of a week or two, this resin will begin to run or work its way down the tree. Of course, it's probably going to gather some impurities. There's other factors that could create an impurity within the resin itself. And so one of the things that's interesting about frankincense is you must divide the resin itself. And you can look at this sample here of resin and you see lots of different color variations. The darker pieces there are what we would call third quality resin. They're more opaque, and there's some of them in there. You have to look for them a little bit, but the more opaque or white pieces of resin are called superfine. In general, superfine is the resin that remains closest to where that incision point was from the tree. It has the least amount of impurities in it. And generally speaking, that third quality resin, that porous quality of the frankincense resin, is the resin that has traveled furthest from that incision point and has gathered impurities and other things within that process. It does not necessarily mean that the essential oil itself that we would liberate from that resin is of a lesser quality. It just means that there's more impurities, and that becomes a concern when you're distilling any essential oil from any plant material. You need to be keenly aware of the impurities, and so time needs to be taken, of course, to separate out each of those resins and definitively decide, are they first, second, third quality, or are they that most desirable superfine quality? These are some of the individuals who are separating the frankincense resin that we've purchased from Oman in that Dhofar region, and they're separating it into those 4 quality grades. Of course, then our resin is distilled. This is just one of the distilleries that we have formed partnerships with all over the world. It's unique when you distill essential oils. Distilling frankincense is very different than distilling peppermint, for example. And there's a skill and a science associated with that. And so we're very careful about the partnerships we form, both for receiving the resin and now in this case for distilling the frankincense essential oil. But when you've done all of that properly, you have an essential oil that produces a lot of health benefits and some very significant value in terms of individual health. These are some of the modern-day uses of frankincense, and I call them modern-day uses because these are the uses where we have a lot of research now is associated with frankincense as an essential oil. Excellent for scar tissue. We talked a little bit earlier about stomach issues and digestive issues. Ulcers certainly is one of those big issues, but we also have ulcerations that can reside on the surface of the skin, and frankincense can be equally beneficial for ulcers that way, and any type of wounds. Frankincense has been noted to build a healthy immune response in your body. It is an effective and actually a very powerful pain reliever. Most people don't think of frankincense that way, but it has good analgesic effects, and there's much in the way of research to demonstrate that. Frankincense, we talked about cold and flu symptoms earlier, and we said this was something that both frankincense and myrrh shared in common. It's a very good expectorant. It's excellent for relieving any type of nervous tension, very calming and very soothing to the central nervous system. And we talked, of course, about its value in skin care. But I want to expand that concept just a little bit and talk about frankincense and 3 other very specific things that would suggest that we want to use frankincense as part of a daily routine. One is what frankincense can do to protect individual cells. The second is how does it affect our mood? And lastly, can and does frankincense control inflammatory responses in our body to help reduce them, knowing that inflammation destroys tissue? So let's talk a little bit about cancer. This is something that most individuals have actually quite a lot of fear about, and it's understandable because we live in an environment that is very toxic, and this is becoming more and more prevalent. It has become almost to the point of not whether or not you will get cancer, but when you'll get cancer in many parts of the world. What's interesting about that is if we look, you're looking at the DNA here with an attached chromosome in place there too. You can see that. When we look at the DNA, and actually I have stated that incorrectly. It's not attached. It's just showing you another variation of DNA representation. So it's estimated that 95% of cancers result from damaged DNA. That there must be factors that exist that when our DNA, because genetic factors associated with our cell, when they become damaged, it's more than just that they become damaged. The cell itself now has a change, and it has the potential to become cancerous in our body. And 95% of all cancers are not genetic in nature. They occur as a result to this damage, a mutation that has occurred within the DNA itself. So I'm going to walk you through some of this process very carefully without getting too deep into the information because we don't have time for that. And I'm more interested tonight in just sharing with you the general concept of why that's so valuable and so significant. There's 3 main causes to DNA disruption in your body. First is free radicals, and by now we've all heard a lot about free radicals. We see it in the news, we see it in the media. It's definitely reported well within medicine. We also know that free radicals exist within our body naturally, as well as we can be exposed to them from the outside environment. So we must control free radicals because the greatest damage that they do is at the cellular level within the DNA itself.